Welcome back to Desk Careers. I'm very excited to be introducing you to our next guest. Today we are zooming around the world and meeting Hermann Simmon, who's currently based in Germany. Hermann is the founder and honorary chairman of Simon Kucher and Partners. Welcome to Desk Careers, Hermann.
Maria, welcome. Good morning in Germany, maybe good afternoon in Dubai.
It is this afternoon here in Dubai, and it's morning for you. Tell us what it's like right now in Germany through this pandemic. I really enjoy learning about these different experiences through the eyes of people from around the world. So what's it like for you, for your colleagues, for people in Germany through this pandemic right now?
Of course, the mood is mixed, but we are increasingly optimistic. Just to give you one number, the incidence of new infections for people over 80 has been at 306 per 100,000 population 6 weeks ago. Now it's down to 60. So the vaccinations really show an effect, and it starts with the old age group, which was most endangered. And right now, yesterday, most stores opened again. And so we are gradually coming back to normal life.
What a journey it's been.
It's over a year now.
I think we're all speechless to just think how this has been a year, and still hoping that things will start to improve, hoping the vaccines will, as you said, start to show efficacy and start to see those numbers dropping and hopefully resuming as normal a life as we can. Today is about you, Hermann. Today we're going to be talking about the man, the professional, and of course the author. I'm so incredibly humbled to have you here. Let's start right at the beginning. Where did your career journey begin? When you were a much younger Hermann, where did it all start for you?
I grew all up on a small farm in a rural, very remote area in the most western part of Germany, then West Germany, because Germany was separated. And I grew up in the Middle Ages, because in the 1950s, when I was a kid, that was only manual work. We did not have machines on the farm. And so I come from a different world. And today you can say I am a global player. I have been working and traveling so much and publishing so much all over the world that it's very difficult to reunify these two worlds. But I think I reunify them because I still like to go back to my home village to speak to people there in their dialect, which is not understandable for a normal German. And a day later, I go to Beijing to give a speech there, or to do Dubai to do a consulting job there.
Can you remember being that younger teenager and thinking about the future and thinking about what you wanted to be doing, especially in hearing you say that you came from a very rural place, the farm life as you described? Can you remember thinking about what you wanted to do when you would grow up? Was that even something that was a thought at that time for you?
In no way related to what I have been doing in the last 40 years. My dream as a youth, when I turned 12 or became a teenager, was to become a starfighter pilot. A starfighter was the main bomber jet of the German Air Force. And since we were in the most western part of West Germany, this region was called the Fortress Eifel. Eifel is the name of the region, because all the air bases were remote from the eastern border, where our potential enemy was placed, the Soviet Union. And so I saw all the times the American, the German jets in the sky, and my dream was to become a starfighter pilot. I failed due to some eye problems, but I still joined the Air Force. And that was also a very formative period for me. it was during the hottest phase of the Cold War in 1968, when the Russians marched into Czechoslovakia, and we were all time on high alert. And the only mission of my fighter bomber wing was to drop nuclear bombs on certain targets east of the Iron Curtain. So that was a quite traumatic time for me. So that was the first step in a professional sense. What came later, even at that time, I could not have imagined.
What was that like? I mean, there's a student watching this right now that won't have any idea of what that was like with you at that time. Even as you're describing it to me now, I'm thinking, wow, this is your experience. Things that we read about, things that students are learning about in history, but never have we had the opportunity to really learn a personal life experience. Is it okay if we take you back to that time and you can share some of those stories with us?
Yeah, the time in the Air Force was very important for me. Until you get your high school exam, you practically know the schools, and then you come into a totally different world. Why was it important for me? In two ways. The first was I learned leadership there. I was as a young officer, 21, 22 years old, in some rather extreme situations with regard to leadership. For instance, one night we had a NATO alarm, and our squadron was equipped with sharp ammunition because we had to protect the nuclear bombs. And half the squadron of 120 soldiers was drunk. So one said, the first one who gets a shot is you, Simon. And how do you handle such a situation at midnight? And I handled it some way. The next day, I got a special recognition because I handled. So as a young person, you learn leadership. The second learning from the time in the military was that I got very interested in social aspects, social sciences, economics, and decided then to study economics. Immediately after my high school graduation, I would have studied engineering because a cousin of mine who was a little older, he was my role model, he had studied engineering. And so such an experience can really redirect you in what you are doing in your life. And I think that was for me a much better discipline than engineering.
Wow. I have to be honest with you, coming into this interview, I didn't imagine that it could take us into this type of a story. I'm really, really humbled that you're here sharing this with us. What would you say that you learned? I know you said that you learned leadership at that time. I know that you said that you learned how to understand the social aspect of the work that you were doing and taking on those responsibilities. But being so young at 21, so I'm imagining a 21-year-old young person today who's probably in the beginning stages, nearing to the middle stages of their university course. They're thinking about employment for the future. They're concerned about, will I find a job? What will I do? Would you say that mindset was similar to the mindset that you would have shared with young people at that time when you were growing up? And if not, what would you offer a person of that age group, a young person thinking, really, this is what I've learned from my life, and these are the tips that I think that you really want to be paying more attention to as you grow older?
Yeah. There's a difference between today and that time. That time was in Germany called the economic miracle. So after the Second World War, Germany was totally destroyed. And then everything developed, everything grew. There was no unemployment, and nobody had concerns about the future. Because never mind what you studied or what you learned, you were certain to get a job. Today, there's much more uncertainty in that regard. The main learning or experience of life, which I also describe in much detail in my autobiography, Many Worlds, One Life, is that I don't think much of having a life plan. When I look at my own development, it was always in phases or in steps. So, for instance, my youth dream to join the Air Force to become a starfighter pilot did not materialize. So I served a couple of years there, but then I had to go a different way. I studied with the intention to become a manager, ideally in a large corporation. After my diploma, or what you call master, today, a professor made me an offer to stay on as an assistant and write a doctoral dissertation. So next 3 years were occupied with the doctoral dissertation. Then again, I made applications to large corporations, but the professor again offered me to stay in the university and to go, we call that in Germany, habilitation. That's a second kind of doctoral dissertation you have to write on a higher level to become a professor. So I stayed in the university. I became a professor. And after 15 years as a professor, as a full tenured professor, I decided to leave the university to set up our consulting company. And I became a manager and a consultant. All this was unplanned. So my advice is, look at the next goal you have, that maybe 2, 3, 5 years, and really focus on that goal and do your work as best as you can. And then new opportunities will turn up. I've been many times at crossroads to decide to stay in the university, to go into practice, to set up my own consulting company, or to continue teaching as professor. I don't think much of having a life plan.
I'm in complete agreement with what you're saying. I can align with that. I can resonate with this. Definitely something that I'm always telling our students is, you're not planning the next 30 years of your life. What we want to do is get you ready for the next step. So let's look at, 3 to 5 years at the most. So this is great to hear you saying this as well. And I agree. Every opportunity comes from the opportunity that you're currently involved in. So you never know where your experiences can take you. How did you decide to start writing? I know doing a dissertation, you would have probably had to do your research, and the intention to write academically would have been there. But what made you decide to go on and write 40 books?
I could never have imagined that when I was a young person. Actually, we started a newspaper in our high school. And so some of my classmates, they were writing. I was the sales manager of that. I didn't try. And later on, I became an author and wrote many books. This is again an indication that you do not know when you are 15 or 20 or 25 what you like to do when you are 50. And another experience is when you start to do something and you dig deeper and you focus on it, your attitude towards this activity changes. You may enjoy it, and you may not have imagined before that you could enjoy this. I could not have imagined as a very active young man that I could spend years sitting behind a desk and writing books. Life tells you what you are good at, what you like, what you don't like as well. This is equally important. Say you can make somewhere money, but you don't like it, then don't do it.
Hermann, what would you say your life has taught you?
My slogan is from Seneca, the old Roman philosopher. And his most important proverb or saying is per aspera ad astra. That means on rough roads to the stars. So it's never an easy way. Anticipate difficulties, failures, necessity to redirect your own life. Don't assume that everything is going smoothly and without problems. Face the difficulties, try to overcome them or avoid them if you are not. For instance, I would love to sing, but I am totally unable to sing. When I sing, my wife is horrified. So I don't sing. I sing only when I'm hiking in the forest alone. So understanding what you are not good at, what you should not do, what you do not like is as important as the positive side of what you can do best and what you like.
So important. And I know so many of us try to avoid those challenges. We are in fear of the challenge, and we try to do our utmost not to have that challenge. But what I'm hearing you say is through those challenges, you will be able to rise above and find your way through. Would you say that in your life journey through this time, I know you have an autobiography, Many Worlds, One Life. And would you say that in writing that autobiography and in remembering your life journey and thinking about the challenges that you would have faced and the journeys that you would have overcome, would you say that it's through those challenges that you've learned the most about yourself and you've learned the most to take forward onto the next opportunity?
Certainly. Let me give you one example. As a postdoctoral fellow, I went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology for a year, and that was a totally new experience for me. But then I thought, I learned a lot scientifically there, but culturally, I did not learn there that much. There's some difference between the European culture and the American culture, but the difference is not that big. Both are Western culture. So I thought, how can you learn more about really different cultures? So I applied to a university, Keio University in Tokyo, and they invited me to a visiting professorship, and I went to Tokyo and lived there for some time. And that was a totally different experience. It's different. I actually went there with my family, with 2 kids, 3 and 8 years old. And the first day my wife had to go to the hospital. So it was really a very, very difficult situation. But what I learned there is that you can organize a society to totally different principles and it still works very well. There's no way to learn that by reading books, by staying at home, but you have to immerse yourself into the foreign environment. This is just one example of a challenge from which I then learned a lot. And this opened for me the door to Asia. In the last years, I have been more in Asia than in America, especially in recent years in China. And that is another great learning experience to see how China has been developing over the last 20 years.
What would you say have been the things that you've noticed most often with young university students in being a professor at the university? When young university students come into the university, what are some of the common things that you're noticing about them, and some tips for our students who will be starting their university journey that can help them prepare for that?
Yeah. I see a difference between the students today or in recent decades and my own studies. We were very political students at that time. So after 68, everything was political. And I also was very active as a student politician. And I would not like to miss this experience. I would almost say that the studies as such were our second priority. So socializing, political activities, going into attending lectures from different fields. So much wider spectrum of activities. And I really feel sad for the students now under Corona that they miss this social experience of the studies. And I think this is as important. Say you leave your parents' homes and study somewhere, to get a broad experience with the world. I even got to know my wife during my studies. What can you wish for more? And today, I see that the students focus very narrowly on their studies. They have strict courses and schedules. And so there's less space for these activities, which I have been describing. But I think that is very, very important.
Incredible. Hermann, talk to us about a typical day right now for you. What's it like to be you in your career right now? You're the founder, you're the honorary chairman, you're well established and well recognized professional in your field. What's it like to be you on a typical day?
If I talk of a typical day in the Corona phase, it's of course very different from a typical day before. Right now, I work mostly in my home office. I do lots of Zoom interviews and presentation, but have been writing 2 new books in the last year. And I go every second day or so to the office at Simon Kucher and Partners. And let me say something about Simon Kucher and Partners. Our specialty is price consulting. And that was also my focus in my academic research. And we are now the global leader in price consulting. We have an office in Dubai. We have 41 offices all over the world and employ more than 1,500 people. So I'm still in contact all the time with our offices. For instance, just a few days ago, we had a Zoom meeting with our office in Cairo, in Egypt, with a high-level group, and it's about a project for Egypt, how they can improve their exports and especially the hidden champions, foster mid-sized international global market leaders. In the last 2 days, I have had contact with our offices in Istanbul, in Dubai, actually, in Tokyo, in Sao Paulo. So I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day management, but I still keep a lot of contacts with our young consultants. So they ask me questions. I have ideas which I inject. And if you go before Corona dominated the world, I was traveling once, twice per week. For instance, in 2019, I went 6 times to China and spent about 6 weeks, 6 to 10 days is the typical duration of a trip to China. And I was in many other countries. But the traveling has, of course, ceased since Corona is there. But I hope to resume it, though on a smaller scale, because I've learned that you also can do many things via Zoom and virtual, and save some time and energy, which was before that time devoted to you could call it excessive travel.
Incredible. Talk to us about Many Worlds, One Life. What's it about?
Yeah, I start with
your autobiography.
With growing up in the Middle Ages. And then I describe some steps which opened me for the world. Just to give you one example, our religion teacher, he organized every year a big tour. And when I was 16, we went to Africa. And going to Africa, first time leaving Europe, opened the eyes for me of the other worlds. Then there's a chapter on the Air Force. It's called Years of Thunder. The time in America, the time in Japan, later the time in other Asian countries, my university life, and also special phase was I was 3 years director of the biggest German management development institute, which has a rotating system where every 3 years a professor comes and directs this institute. So I got to know everybody in the top management in Germany, and so it's very varied. People who write, I read it. Some people say I started and didn't stop reading, but this judgment is up to the reader. But I think it's not one thing I can promise. It's not boring.
Incredible. Where do you see yourself, or what do you see yourself doing in the next, as you said, 2, 3, 5 years?
That's, of course, a very concrete but difficult question. And I'm just reading a book called Lifespan by a famous Harvard professor who is the expert in research on aging. And he says, I'm now 74. With 74, you're nothing. If you, with new science, and if you have a good lifestyle, you can live another 30 years. Whether that comes true, I don't know. But this book is changing my perspective on the next 10 or 20 years. For I'm rather thinking about what will I do in the next 10 or 20 years than about the next 3 years. Because the next really 3 years, I will probably continue more or less. And one question is, I'm asking me is, should I experience totally different spheres of life? I can go on to write another 3 or 5 books, more or less the same with variations. Or should I go to India for a couple of months and learn meditation or something? Should I look into alternative medicine? So what actually does traditional Chinese medicine do? Should I talk more to theologians to learn about their thinking? I mean, I've read books on all these topics over the years, but I never have dived more deeply into these things. And that could be an interesting challenge. That would be another world, adding to the many worlds I have experienced already. But that's for right now, it's a question mark. It's this Lifespan book, which says when you are 70, you have to think about 30 years and not about the next 5 years or so, is influencing me and affecting me.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Lifespan book, and that you mentioned how at this age you want to be looking at the next 20, 30 years. But rewinding right to the beginning of our interview when we were talking about tips for the youth, the tip was, don't worry about so far into the future. Just plan that beginning, that first few steps. So that's a really interesting perspective on it, Hermann. And I think what I'm really inspired by, I mean, there's so many things you're telling me today. You're a very inspirational man. But what's really standing out for me is the aspirations that you have. And I think most youth believe that you get to, I think you said 50, and you know, like that, you know, the supposed to be the peak of one's career, and you should be floating after that. But what you're now showing us is we're always growing. We're always striving to learn more, to gain more knowledge, to gain more cultural experiences, and to find new opportunities to discover things that we haven't yet discovered. That's so incredibly inspiring. And I hope that anybody watching this right now walks away from this interview really owning that concept of it. There's never an end. You know, for as long as we have life, there should always be some new opportunity or challenge to keep you going. And what an incredible person to be able to interview today. I'm so humbled that you're here. Talk to us about Mrs. Simon. What is it like for her to be on this journey with you? If she were sitting in this interview right now, how would she describe Mr. Simon?
I think her description should be would be quite consistent, and I owe her a lot. What I became would not have been possible without her, and he describes that also in the autobiography. For instance, at each decision, I describe some of these crossroads. Do you stay in the university to become a professor? She said, of course you do it. Next step, do you go to America? And I said, first, I go without family because it's too complicated with the family. I want to focus. She said, first, of course you go to America, and we come along. So she came along. Then to Japan, very difficult. She said, I come along with the two children, 3 and 8 years old. And right now, since our grandson couldn't go to school, schools were closed, she's doing schooling 5 days a week now, since this week, 2 days a week, because they have intermittent schooling with our grandson who is 9 and a girl from the neighborhood who is also same age. And she was a teacher before, so she is again a teacher now. So she would share my views with a kind of moderation that she would certainly say should be a little calmer now, not travel that much, not be that hectic, etc. But without a spouse or a life partner, you cannot achieve that. I was traveling all the time. She organized, she built our house and our second house. I didn't bother about all these things. You need somebody who keeps your back free from certain daily hassles, calls, and obligations. So I owe her a lot. Without her, I would not have achieved that. But it would be interesting to ask her. You can do that. Her English is better than mine.
Would you say that young people should be concerned about a degree, or after hearing everything that you've said, would you say that they should want the degree, gain the knowledge, but be more concerned with the life experiences?
Yeah, so I would say don't confine yourself to the studies and getting the degree. Life is more than a degree. In 10 years, you will have forgotten about the degree, even about most what you were taught. But you will have collected a set of experience from these very important years who can enrich you and help you for life. In terms of social relations, of connections, of exposure to different fields of thinking, of knowledge, etc.
I can talk to you all day. I know I'm very conscious of our time and your time. Hermann, I am just so excited to be sharing this story with our students and our community here in the United Arab Emirates, and of course, our global community as well. Thank you for joining us and for sharing your incredible story. Where can we find you if we wanted to buy your books or just follow your social channels? Where can we find you?
The simplest way is to go to hermannsimon.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, and share my thoughts there. Always under Hermann Simmon.
Thank you for joining us today. And that brings us to the end of an incredible conversation. Today, we were speaking with Hermann Simmon, who was zooming in from Germany, sharing his life journey, his career experiences, and his aspirations. I'll see you all at our next Deaf Careers Digital Spotlight.